All right. Hello and welcome. My name is Neil. I'm the Programs and Exhibit Specialist here at the Arlington Heights Memorial Library. Thank you all so much for joining us tonight. I'm delighted you're here for Stuffed, a history of the Thanksgiving table. This program will dive into one of America's most beloved traditions, the Thanksgiving meal. Tonight we'll hear stories about the history and cultural forces behind the foods that have come to define this holiday, why they emerged and how they evolved, and what they reveal about us. I'm thrilled to welcome back Christina Ward, an author, editor, and seeker, as well as the vice president and editor of Feral House, a publisher known for its bold and unconventional titles. With her signature insight and humor, Christina will take us through the surprising tales, regional influences, and symbolic meanings baked into the dishes that appear on so many Thanksgiving tables. Please join me in giving a warm virtual welcome to Christina Ward. Hi, Christina.
Hi, Neil. Thanks for having me back. Some of you may remember I was speaking about my book, Holy Food, which talks about like the religious essentially influence on American food culture. I bring that up because, first of all, when we talk about Thanksgiving, we have to think about where it's coming from. And so that's what I want to talk about today. And so what you're looking at is a very fun graphic of Thanksgiving dinner. I know Thanksgiving is a celebration in modern times of friends and family and shared meals. And we've gotten away from, as time evolved, from the religious significance of Thanksgiving and its religious origins. And that's okay, because one of the things that has universal and consistent about Thanksgiving is that it's changing all the time. Even from the earliest days, it never really was what we think it was. And so I want to talk about that. So our next slide shows that what we're seeing is the origination, that origin story that everyone was taught in grade school about the Pilgrims. So the Pilgrims, of course, were Protestant fundamentalist extremists that were kicked out of England, kicked out of Holland, and came to the United States they landed in Massachusetts in 1621. It was tough. They weren't really prepared for city people essentially, and they were not prepared for the wilds of Massachusetts, nor were they really prepared for meeting other people. There was this great mythology in Western Europe that essentially that there was no people anywhere in North America, and of course we know they were wrong. It was those unknown people, which were the Wampanoag people of Massachusetts, who essentially helped and taught these new immigrants, these settlers, these colonists, what they could eat and what they couldn't. Because if we think about the original colony, in the first year, half of them died, 50% dead. And then by that second year, the Wampanoag people had helped them, started teaching them what are the foods that you can eat that actually grow here. Through that help, the Pilgrim settlement, they were able to kind of keep themselves going another year. And they decided from the religious leaders of that was Winslow, and then William Bradford, who was the governor of the colony. And they started, as was the tradition in Protestantism, to declare a thankful feast in honor of God's good graces and goodwill and his gifts. And fun side note is I come from very old Yankee stock on my dad's side, and my great Aunt Virginia says that we're descended from William Bradford. Now, I don't have the proof of that, but this is also important to think about us as Midwesterners because a lot of us actually have these Yankee roots, and those Yankee roots are what helped spread the Thanksgiving tradition. If you see the text on the screen, this is the original text of Bradford's Declaration of Thanksgiving, and you can see that it is about worshiping God and thanking God. And as we go on, and we're going to see the next slide. And here is one of more of the famous depictions in black and white of the first Thanksgiving feast. Of course, there was no pictures. Nobody thought to document it beyond in their diaries, which they did. So this is why we know that this event actually happened, because it was documented in the proclamations in their diaries. One thing that is most accurate and why I chose to show everybody this picture is if you notice that the native people, the Wampanoag, are separated. from the settlers. So as much as the Wampanoag people helped the English settlers, they were still considered lesser. And that is something of a through line that happens in the United States. Because who was here first? It was the Wampanoag. And what did we eat at Thanksgiving? We ate foods that were inspired by like the English cuisine that was familiar, but essentially substituted with the native ingredients. But I've got a plot twist for you, and Neil's going to show us the next slide. Here's another version of Thanksgiving. And these jovial, happy people sitting with Native Americans look nothing like what we think of as like the dour Protestant Puritan pilgrims. It's because they're not. In 1606, the French settlers at St. Croix Island up in the UP essentially founded the Order de Good Cheer. And they too, when the French came as colonists, as settlers, they too encountered some really hardships in figuring out the North American landscape. And at that time, the Chippewa bands and the Lakota, again, in that spirit of community, helped the French. A little different though, versus considering it this very worshipful, religious, significant, thanking God. The French settlers took it as a big party. And funny enough, it was the same time in November at the harvest, because both in France and England, there's a long tradition of celebrating the end of the harvest. And so our Thanksgiving feasts come from both that tradition of the French Catholic excess of celebration and feasting, the Protestant more low-level feasting that celebrates God's gifts. And so in between those two, all of a sudden, we have now this tradition of feasting. I'm curious, and please put it in the chat, if anybody had ever heard, had knew that there was like essentially a French-inspired version of a Thanksgiving dinner in the United States. That, again, the date was 1606, which was about 15 years prior to when the Pilgrims came to the United States. So if anybody knew that already, let me know, because that's kind of fun. One of the other things that we talk about, if we go to the next slide, is that Thanksgiving as a thing, it wasn't necessarily, if you noticed on the date from William Bradford, they declared it November 29th of 1621 was the first Thanksgiving. But it was never really an official American holiday. It was always considered like a tradition, a religious holiday. And so each state then who was interested took on that role of announcing when Thanksgiving was. There was no set firm date. Now we have it as the third Thursday of November, but it was always just, up to each guy. I've found a few things in the newspaper archives from Arlington Heights, and it highlights a few of the traditions. Is the governor sets Thanksgiving date. And this is from 1905. So your 1905 Thanksgiving in Illinois was on November 30th. And the other tradition that has kind of fallen by the wayside that was developed in the North America, that I think, and I'll make a little bit of a theoretical kind of leap and guess, is especially here in the Midwest, we celebrated the night before or sometimes the night of Thanksgiving with a dance. And so a lot of the churches and fraternal organizations and other community groups would sponsor a dance for folks to get together. A lot of them became like fundraising things. They would serve supper. They also became, of that time period, a way for young men to meet young women from good families. And so this idea of building community has always been one of the through lines of our Thanksgiving dinner. Our far image on the right is President Theodore Roosevelt and setting the proclamation of Thanksgiving. And he did that for the United States. And he was one of the first ones after it started really becoming official, a holiday that remove that power from the governors and set it with the federals. If we can go to the next one, Neil, we'll see something. And what the catalyst for really the spread of Thanksgiving as a celebration, as a feast, was the Civil War in the United States through the 1860s. What it did is that the Union soldiers, mostly Northern, mostly either Midwestern or Yankee, had a long tradition of Thanksgiving, whereas in the South, it wasn't as much of a tradition. It wasn't something that was celebrated. But as People, Northerners went south to fight in the war, and Southerners met more Northerners. The Union Army always celebrated Thanksgiving, and it became this tradition, and more Southern people were informed about it. Um, Thanksgiving itself was the work of becoming a national holiday was the work of one woman. And if we go to the next slide, we can see that what she did was in 1863. Here's a copy of the actual letter that she wrote to President Abraham Lincoln. Again, really the father of American Thanksgiving. And she wrote to him to say, this is an important festival. This is something that we need to do to bring our country together in this time of civil war, of death and destruction, as families torn apart. By having a communal dinner, by giving our thanks to God, and by giving our thanks to our families, and making our new families with our soldiers, we'll help heal the nation. If we go to the next slide, Neil, you can see then that is what happened. So on October 3rd of 1863, William Seward, as Secretary of the State on behalf of President Abraham Lincoln, proclaimed that this nationwide Thanksgiving was going to happen. And it was that also the tradition of a Thanksgiving proclamation. We don't see it as much today, but it was always something that the whatever the chief politician was, whether it's a president or a governor, would always make a declaration, a statement of unity, of thankfulness, of gratefulness, and and some of them are better than others, but it was something of the very long tradition. And this is a great piece of American history, so everybody can go look it up on the Internet Library of Congress. Has got some really great documents that people can look and read the actual proclamation that Lincoln wrote out to start off Thanksgiving. All right, we can go to the next slide, Neil, because that brings us to the turkeys. So I don't know, Neil, if you need to do a thing.
Yeah, the poll, we're going to forget about it, Christina. I can't seem to get it right now. We can just move
Oh,
ahead.
right. So everybody send us in your chat how many people are sitting in your living room or kitchen, like I am in my kitchen. Um, and so I wanted to talk first about how did we get to Thanksgiving and why the holiday? And then we can go now, I've got that out of the way. We can talk about the food. Turkeys, 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 turkeys. Turkey is an American bird. Do they have turkeys in other places? Yes, but this is very much a traditional wild turkey. If you've eaten wild turkey before, like if you have hunters in your family, put that in the chat too, because wild turkey, hunted turkey tastes very, very different than our, standard butter balls. And so the turkeys were part of what was served at that first Thanksgiving, as well as squashes like pumpkins, where we now really love mashed potatoes, mashed white potatoes, but not that wasn't served at the first Thanksgiving or early Thanksgivings. It was sweet potatoes, again, native to North America. Usually Europeans relied a lot on wheat flours that was not growing yet in those first few years. And so it was the Wampanoag that taught Americans about corn. And so you see a lot of the recipes then change because they substitute corn flour for the wheat, and start figuring it out. The other thing that always seems a little odd to modern thinkers about what we're eating for dinner is at that time in the late 1600s or the early 1600s, oysters and lobster off the Massachusetts, off that Atlantic seaboard were abundant. They were considered like pests. And so that was actually a really cheap food. And so at the first Thanksgiving was lobster and oysters. And now we're thinking like, wow, that's so decadent. But it wasn't. It was kind of considered like, just cheap and easy food. Um, the other thing is the fruits and the things. So everything was the native apples, the native blueberries and blackberries. Everything worked together. And so when we think about like an Indian pudding, which is like kind of the very American name, that's a version of it's the Native American dish made of like cornmeal and fresh berries, and usually with a little maple syrup. Um, and so that's really the idea. So we go to the next slide, Neil. We talk about our turkeys. And so now, why am I telling you to sign up for the Arlington Heights Turkey Trot next week? Because it has a lot to do with your turkeys and your meal. Why do we do this? Why do we run before we go eat dinner? Well, there's a reason. If we go to the next slide, you'll see because turkeys are notoriously ornery beasts. It's not like they're very docile at all. So even if you were farming a turkey, the turkey stock came from a wild turkey. They weren't easy to transport. People didn't have like a big truck. And so to get a turkey to town, so if you're in Arlington Heights, if you're in Chicago and you wanted a turkey in the late 1800s, after, post Civil War, is turkey farmers would physically walk them to town. And most towns were always 10 miles apart. That was the old geography. And so the farmers would just take that, and sometimes it would take them a few days. And then it became tradition for kids and, people to kind of walk along and kind of go along and march along with the turkeys into town. And that was the origination of the turkey trot. And so we recreate that by having kind of fun runs and charity runs on Thanksgiving morning. And we'll go to the next slide. And so here's a picture, and this was going on for a while. You can see this is like 1920s, and that is coming into Chicago. That was a bunch of turkeys coming into town. Um, and this was the turkey that would end up on your plate. And you can see they look different. They look different than the turkeys of today. And if we can go to the next slide. And so turkey has been one of the mainstays. It's kind of the one kind of focal point. Again, turkey, I know there's people that love turkey, but there's also more people that don't love turkey. But it's still there. So if we look at this little graph, it shows us the predominance of the kinds of foods that people are eating all around the country. And so is it a roasted turkey? Is it a brine turkey? Who's more prevalent? The stuffing. What is the stuffing? And this is all of the things I was talking about the past comes into play right now. Because are you using a bread-based stuffing, a mushroom stuffing, a sausage stuffing, a cornbread stuffing? Do you add oysters to your stuffing? If you add oysters to your stuffing, you are following the traditions of the 1600s, of the original pilgrims, and the idea of different breads. You can see where cornbread versus pumpkin bread were just regular rolls. And are they corn-based side? Are there green beans? Is it rice? And so most of the country is like green beans all the way. What kind of salads are we eating? Fruit salad, jello salad, green salad, and appetizers. There's all this tradition. Are we, in the South, the idea of a cheese ball with a nut-studded cheese ball, and in the North, we're just eating a little different. We're doing a lot of artichoke dip and stuffed mushrooms. And most importantly to me, the last are the main stars of the meal, the potato. Are you going with a mashed potato, white potato? Are you going with a casserole? Are you going with sweet potatoes? Are you going with scallop? So there's lots of choices, but these are the core things. And then the pie. Now, of course, going back to the original, because pumpkin, squash, native to North America, so we have pumpkin pie. That's the very traditional thing. But again, pecan pie and a sweet potato pie, very traditional as well, or apple pie. And you can see all throughout the country that people do it differently. And how they do it is, of course, influenced from where they grew up and what their family traditions were, and a little bit of where their families originally came from. And that's a little difference. If you look, I'm a Wisconsinite, and you can see we're still pumpkin pie people, but in Illinois, sweet potato pie. And there's a reason for that, because of the Great Migration in the 1930s brought so many African Americans up from the South, and they brought their food traditions with them. So everybody's celebrating Thanksgiving just a little bit differently, and then we start bringing it all together and we start sharing our traditions. We can see the next slide. So this is a turkey that I made. That was the part it cut out. It was for a photo shoot for a magazine. I was writing an article about how do you make a turkey. And so this is a very traditional turkey. And so it's got a little white wine, a little butter, the traditional spices, a little bit of garlic, thyme, a little bit of, a little oregano in there. And then sticking out of it, this was an old tradition from my grandmother, who was, again, kind of an old Yankee, because your turkey isn't just your turkey. You have to think about your turkey soup, your turkey tetrazzini, and all your turkey leftovers. And so by stuffing the carcass with just onion, celery, and carrots, when it all cooks down, you end up with the makings when you take your carcass for a fantastic broth that's ready to go for soup. So there's my one food tip for you from my grandmother and a very old Yankee. And if we could see the next slide. And here we have different examples of sweet potatoes, how sweet potatoes are served. And let me know too, that I love the chat feature in this because we get to kind of talk to you guys a little bit and get to see what you're thinking. Because one of the things that I cannot stand personally, that I know is beloved by so many people, is that sweet potato casserole with the nuts and the marshmallows. To me, it's too sweet, but I know people love it. Are you a sweet potato casserole person? Do you like it with the marshmallows? I don't. Or what ways are you serving sweet potatoes? And again, our traditions are so mixed up together where it's beautiful to bring in everybody's traditions. Now, people will tell you, and every food writer will tell you, Thanksgiving is not the time to experiment with a new recipe. Go with your tried and true. But I also say, just you can embrace a tradition and introduce a new tradition, so you don't have to do something that's like molecular, but you can change it up a little bit once in a while. And we'd see our next slide, we'll see our next example of merspreters. So got to do that, and the next one please. Oh, yeah, the turkey pan, that's the traditional old, like, kind of enameled pan, roasting pan. And that was actually my mother-in-law's from the 1940s. And so here you see examples of different stuffings. One of the elements in stuffing, and we've talked about, is it cornbread? Again, corn coming back to the origins of Thanksgiving. Is it rice based? There is a lot of, especially towards the southern and the Atlantic seaboard, you'll see more rice because rice was grown South Carolina, North Carolina. There's native rices growing, as well as in the northern and the upper Midwest, wild rice, which, to be technical, isn't really a rice. It's a different type of grain, but we call it wild rice. Wild rice was also present at the first Thanksgiving. So incorporating wild rice into your meal or into your stuffing is a great way to honor the Wampanoag people who, brought the goods for the first meal. And if we see our next slide, we're going to look at, here's a couple of the outliers. Of course, you've got the mashed potatoes, but something that is a recent innovation that I think, in just observationally, as someone who follows food history and works in that field, is the macaroni and cheese. Now, macaroni and cheese previously, it's very southern in origin, kind of came up north, and it was usually served traditionally with Easter dinner because the macaroni and cheese and the ham was like kind of that modern from like the 60s, 70s on. It was the traditional side dish for ham for Easter. Over the past decade, macaroni and cheese has been making an appearance on the Thanksgiving table. And so we're seeing it more and more. And again, with no geographic kind of prevalence anywhere. It's just that people really like macaroni and cheese. If you're serving macaroni and cheese this year, just kind of put it in the chat. I'm asking people to do that because it's always interesting to me, and then we learn about each other, what everybody else is doing. I can everybody voted. Nobody wants turkey this year. What they want is just the sides. So we're actually going to do a Thanksgiving that is no turkey, just the sides. And if we could get the next slide, please. And the other thing that is a modern American invention that knows no ethnic origin, no historical origin, is the green bean casserole. The green bean casserole is almost, ubiquitous with Thanksgiving. I know 90% of the people who make green bean casserole make it only on Thanksgiving. And they're not making it any other time. It becomes almost like a signal, is that it's not Thanksgiving unless you have the green bean casserole. That casserole was invented in the 1950s by Dorcas Riley, who was a food scientist who worked for Campbell's Foods. And many of the food scientists and the domestic science of that era, from the 30s, 40s, 50s, their biggest job was inventing recipes that used that company's products. And so when you see that advent of all of the box and this and that and these kind of funky recipes, the ones that we look back on today when we see pictures of, we often go like, oh my God, who ate that? Well, not many people actually ate it, but the green bean casserole stuck. So for every like great recipe coming out of the corporate kitchens, there are probably 100 terrible recipes. Anybody who suffered through peanut butter and mayonnaise sandwiches as a child from grade school, you can again thank Hellman's mayonnaise for that. So remember, just because it was grandma's recipe doesn't necessarily mean it was actually grandma's recipe. It may have been something that came out of a corporate cookbook. But again, as Americans, we love to eat. We love also to just kind of try things, and we will adopt anybody's traditions, food or religion or anything, if it brings us all together and makes us happy and, tastes good. Um, and the next slide, please. The other big controversial item on our Thanksgiving table, again, rooted back to the Wampanoag people, is cranberries and a cranberry sauce. This is a very nice, fancy cranberry sauce. It is homemade, it looks beautiful. And if you go to the next slide, Neil, we can see the canned version of the cranberry sauce. Now, again, it's only during Thanksgiving do we really eat this like canned cranberry sauce. But again, like the green bean casserole, it's become one of those anchor foods that it almost feels like it's not Thanksgiving unless that is on the table. I I made this picture because it was so indicative of my personal experience in the Midwest, where the goal was to try to see if you could get the whole piece can of cranberry sauce in one solid lump. And that was always considered a great victory to put on the table, just like that as the whole can. Um, but it also shows that we love tradition, but we also like easy. And so the cranberry sauce is a great way. Again, let me know is anybody actually making homemade cranberry sauce? It's actually quite easy to make. It really is. It's delicious if you make it from scratch. So if you're feeling like it, I challenge you to try it. You need cranberries, maybe just a touch of brown sugar, um, and really tastes good. If you want to do it on a sweeter side, cook it down with a little orange juice. Otherwise, port wine. That makes it really tasty. So try it out. All right, and the next slide. It is like night and day. Ingrid is saying it's like night and day. And again, if you've never had homemade cranberry sauce, try it. Really seek it out. Um, I'm looking at, and what you're looking at is the recipe for pumpkin pie from the first American published cookbook so published on American soil. It was from the 1700s. And old recipes are nothing like modern recipes because they make an assumption of that you know how to cook already, that you don't need to be told how to do things. It's essentially just, a list of ingredients and the ratios. And so the original pumpkin pie recipe, a quart of stewed and strained of mashed pumpkin, 3 pints of cream, 9 beaten eggs, sugar, mace, nutmeg, ginger, and with into a dough and baked for 3/4 of an hour. The recipe is pretty much all the same today. And you notice there's two versions. One has the beaten egg version, and that's a very custardy one. And the second version has a little bit different spicing and less heavy cream and milk. If I'm making a pumpkin pie, I'm going to go more for number one, the heavier custard pie. Um, what's funny about it, in my view, of how these traditions stay with us is if you look at the spice profile and what we're eating in a pumpkin pie, it is almost unchanged. You could follow that recipe today and come up with a pretty good pie. And so these flavors of mace and nutmeg, ginger, cinnamon are ones that we associate with Thanksgiving because we've been making these foods for, you know, 200, 300 years. And if we can go to the next slide, please. And here we have our beautiful pumpkin pies in all of their different glories because there are so many different ways to make a pumpkin pie. And again, but it is also kind of easy. So if you're afraid of pies, don't be. Start with a pumpkin pie. It's probably your easiest way in. It really is an easy pie. I promise. I promise. But again, if you go to a nice bakery and buy a pie, their pie is going to be pretty good too. Uh, and I will say, I think one of the best traditions about American Thanksgiving is eating pumpkin pie the next day with coffee. So always save an extra slice for that. We get to see the next slide, please. One of the things that's really, again, I kind of alluded to and talked about as being American, this is a different looking kind of Thanksgiving dinner. And you can see a lot of different kinds of foods because everybody who comes to America comes with their preferences and their traditions of eating food. Yet we become Americans through our stomach by eating all these foods. It happened to the first pilgrims as they had their idea of what their recipes were going to be and what they could eat. And then they found out none of those foods existed in this place where they were living. And that is the immigrant experience over and over and over again. People come to the country, they have their favorite dishes, and then they realize that, oh, I've got to figure this out differently. I need to make it a little differently. And people have taken that and then incorporate that into Thanksgiving. If we go to the next slide, we can see different versions of it. This is one of my favorite just things of if we look especially in areas that have like a concentrated immigration pattern, you'll see different traditions really take root in an area. I know in Arlington Heights, there is a long tradition of Japanese Americans, of Japanese immigration. And so you've got all these wonderful innovations of incorporating Japanese cooking techniques as well as Japanese flavor profiles into the American Thanksgiving. So you're seeing like up in the upper picture is a version of a turkey, but it's done with a teriyaki and well as like kind of a tonkatsu style, little fried style. Those are matcha little muffins. The traditional dinner rolls, but made with sweet potatoes, kind of like how the traditional ubi rolls are made. And then, of course, I found this wonderful, wonderful T-shirt that someone in Illinois has made called Gobblezilla. So um, I kind of want one, so so I think it's a great idea, and I think it's also great representation of this notion of how does it become American? It becomes American because it's here, and we just kind of keep rolling and adopting new traditions and making them our own. If we can see the next slide, because if you go, I know Italian families, it's very traditional to serve the turkey, all the very American side dishes, but in addition to that, usually a lasagna or a stuffed manicotti. And if we go to the next slide, and if you're in a traditionally Northern Mexican kind of family, you're going to have your turkey, but you're also going to have tamales. And in addition to the pies, you might also have like a rice pudding. And so these are, again, have become traditional to serve with the Thanksgiving dinner. And if we go to the next slide here, because Thanksgiving dinner is really just about eating food together. It's about sharing our community, our ideas about each other in the way that makes us feel like we are united. And that's why I think that Thanksgiving as a holiday is so very dear to Americans' hearts because it is the holiday that celebrates community, it celebrates working together, and it celebrates food. It celebrates all of us bringing our favorite thing to the table. And it doesn't have to be fancy. And, you know, who doesn't love peanuts? And as exemplified by the great Peanuts Thanksgiving cartoon episode, which again showed that popcorn and toast, really, it doesn't matter what you're eating. It just matters that you're all eating it together. So that's kind of where I want to stop because we wanted to leave some time and for folks to ask questions. And I'm happy to answer them. And you can send something through the chat and we can you know, if you guys want to hit me with a food question about cooking, actual technical cooking, I can handle it. If you have a question about the history of a certain item, where it came from, or why you want to eat it, or why are we eating it at Thanksgiving, put it in the chat. I'll do my best to answer, and I'll let you know if I don't know.
I'm just taking a look at some of the chats that have come in, Christina. Let me see here. Beloved mac and cheese. I want that this Thanksgiving.
Why do
Why
we
do
like
we?
pecan pie? Pecan pie. Now, pecan pie came to us from the South, the Southern tradition. Pecans growing very well. Again, relatively cheap food. The core essence of the ingredients in a pecan pie is corn syrup. So there's our corn and the pecans. And it's again considered a cheaper food. And a lot of the foods that we celebrate and we use at Thanksgiving we're more working class. We're more accessible for people who are farming. And this wasn't a feast of like excess or wealth. It was the regular people feast. And so the pecan pie originated in the South in the tradition of using a corn syrup, so kind of derived from corn, and then using up the pecans. It's a pretty simple pie to make too. You don't need a lot of fuss to do it, so that also makes it highly adoptable in cuisines. When something is easy to make, people are more likely to make it. And so that's spread. Again, it spread two ways. With the intermingling post-Civil War, as more people were kind of just on the move after the Civil War, was one of the great displacement of American populations is post-Civil War, whether it was newly emancipated Black people who tended to either go north or to the west, the exodusters, settling in Kansas and North Texas and Oklahoma, and they brought their pecan pie with them. The same folks, whenever people were coming north, they brought their pecan pie with them. And that is the pathway. Most of the foods that, if they're not native to your specific region, but we still loved him, and your family ate it. It came to you some way, form or fashion, whether it was a relative 100 years ago or your neighbor who introduced it to you last Thanksgiving. But it's usually these foods are brought to us.
Great. It's interesting. We'll wait for some more questions to come in. So my dad's from Illinois, my mom's from Alabama, and so we get this nice mix of kind of the southern and northern kind of stuff. Although I wish maybe she'd have a little bit more of the southern flavor on the turkey because it's typically kind of bland. But I loved your idea. My mom always makes the soup afterwards too. Unfortunately, my dad likes to put the stuffing into the turkey, which is not my favorite. We do a side pan for everyone else.
Um, as from the food perspective, I'm going to answer. I'm answering questions that Neil didn't ask. One, stuffing the turkey with the actual like bread, if you're using a bread-based stuffing, is not a great idea. And this is from a very more food safety point of view. Um, Turkeys are big in the United States. You're looking at 20, 25 pounder, and just the way everything's cooked, it's a low and slow cook, and the opportunity for a pathogen to take root in that stuffing and make someone sick is really high. So I would recommend definitely, if your tradition is to stuff that bird, do it, but also do the side pan. And when you take that stuffing out of the bird, put it in a different pan and bake it for longer. Okay, just make me happy because botulism and food poisoning is never something that's welcome on Thanksgiving. The other question that Neil didn't ask, but kind of brought up, it's something the turkey hotline, right? Christopher Kimball for Milk Street, the famous Butterball Turkey Hotline. People have a hard time with turkeys because we have an expectation with turkey, and turkey is a very lean meat. There's not a lot of fat there, and it dries out really easily. So you've got all these cooking techniques. The brining is said to help, or you'll see the deep frying of turkeys, which again, a recent innovation, mostly because people can do it, so they do it. The secret, though, if you really want a moist and tender turkey, you need fat. You've got to add fat to it. So whether you're basting, and traditionally the best baste is a butter. And so you use a butter baste throughout. And that's going to keep it really moist. The secret trick to if you really need that is make a butter paste with a little butter and a little salt and pepper and get between the skin of the bird and the flesh, and you shove all that butter in there when it's roasted, and then you put it in the oven, and that keeps that fat next to the skin of between the skin and the flesh of the bird, and that's going to keep your turkey very moist and flavorful.
I'm gonna give you another one then. So
Good.
like each year there's like a new way to cook turkeys. So, going back to let's say 20 years ago when I was living in the city, we had a guy that almost burned down our apartment building by frying it, deep frying the turkey. This year I see that cheesecloths on top are like, what some people are using. Do you have any opinions on that, or is it just the old-fashioned way of, roasting the turkey that's the best?
Yeah, it's the old-fashioned way. It is that, and this is all born out of the fact that turkey's kind of dry if you on its own. It's not it doesn't have a lot of flavor. And so people do these kind of ideas and tricks and things to try to improve the flavor and the consistency of the meat of the bird. And that's also the American notion of innovation. We always think that there's a better mousetrap somewhere if we build it. And so that's kind of exciting, especially when you have traditions where it's the same foods essentially that you're eating year after year. And so there's always that kind of idea of like, well, how can we do it a little differently, but not so differently that it would change the scope of what the meal is. But again, the best way, low and slow. Low and slow is the way to roast. That's it. And add fat in. That's really all you can do to make it. And it's simple. And that's why it works.
So Ashley says, I can see why it's dry. You need other foods to spice it up.
Yeah, a lot of times people will do that where you'll see people eating, right? You take a stab, a little piece of turkey, and then you load it up with like your cranberry sauce, potato, and stuffing, and see if you can get every single food in one bite, right? And that is, a way because it's the turkey is like the delivery mechanism for the rest of it. Um, but again, you can make turkey taste really, really good. Just a little bit of spicing and a lot of fat, and you're going to get a very good tasting bird.
Good to know. Um, I don't know. I think that might be it for the questions. Christina, do you have any tips that you would like to give us for the Thanksgiving meal? Any ways to avoid, I don't know, some stress?
The way to avoid stress is to, I would say, I'm going to be honest with you, which is make your pies the day before at least. You could probably even go 2 days before. Keep them in the fridge, or keep them in, like what we Midwesterners say, like it's cold enough. Keep them in the garage or the back hall. Um, but you know, it's about planning and also about grace, not the grace that we say, but giving yourself the grace that your Thanksgiving celebration is your friends and your family. These aren't the people, they're not Michelin judges going to give you a star or take one away at your restaurant. Give yourself the grace to maybe everything's late. Maybe for the third year in the row, you forgot to put the cranberry sauce out. It's okay. It's all okay because it's really about being together with people. So that's my first thing. Reduce the stress, make your pies at least the day before, and don't worry about the timeline or the clock. The other thing that you should do, again, to prevent stress is watch that bird. If you're buying a frozen turkey, it does not defrost the day. Yeah, so that usually needs 48 to 72 hours to defrost a frozen bird in the refrigerator. So keep that. A lot of times, what people who work in food do is even if you've done it 100 times, you make a little chop list. You'll make a little list of everything that you have to do in the order you have to do it, just as a reference to keep going. So you don't forget things. So the bird's got to go in by noon, and then like then you kind of clock out a little bit, and then you do your planning. How long do the potatoes take? How long? And then you set yourself a little bit of a time schedule, and that way that helps you get all the food done at the same time ish. And it also helps, anchor you from being too stressed out.
Helpful, very helpful. All right. Well, I want to thank you so much. Thanks for coming back. Thanks for telling us about this really interesting history of our food.
Well, thanks for having me. I delight in talking about food and sharing all the wonderful history that we create every holiday.
It's a magnificent thing. Have a great one. Have a great Thanksgiving, Christina. I hope you all watching have a wonderful Thanksgiving too, and we'll see you down the road.
Yeah, thanks everyone.
All right. Have a good night, everyone.